Hello and welcome to Why Did the English Sides Fail in Europe? I'm going to get into the myths around this. We've heard these things for many years now, and also talk about what I think is the real reason why we have seen a lower performance this season. Now, first up, before we get into that, hi, I'm Paul, the guy behind DrivingMaul, and if you look up there, hopefully you'll see a face, and that's because I need to get to 1,000 subscribers, so please do subscribe. That allows me to keep my partner status, and which helps to bring in a little bit of money to help with my website hosting fees and all of that kind of stuff. So please do. Now, as I say, before we get into looking at the English teams, we've got to admit that the Pro 14 and the top 14 sides are good teams. And so, look, it's not all about what the English teams are doing, it's also about what those other teams are doing right. And so, look, yes, hats off, as it were, well done. They are decent teams and they deserve to the success they get. So, let's not forget about that. Also, at this level, it's all about, a lot of these things are about fine margins. And so, yes, these things could have gone the other way. It's not all doom and gloom. The two second place teams that didn't go through were Wasps and Exeter. So they were there or thereabouts in that kind of sense. So and a couple of seasons ago, the Pro 14 didn't get any teams into the quarterfinals. So, well, it's not, these things do go in cycles a little bit. The teams, certain leagues do have on and off years. But there is definitely one thing I think that is a bit of systemic issue with the Aviva Premiership. Now, let's go through some of the myths first as to why the English teams didn't do well. One of those is that comes up every time is the fact that the Aviva Premiership Rugby has relegation and the Pro 14 doesn't. Now, there are two things about this. One, the top 14 also has relegation, but it doesn't seem to have stopped them, does it? Also, the teams that do qualify for the Champions Cup really don't have to worry about relegation. Exeter and Saracens aren't starting the season going, okay, let's make sure we get so many points we avoid relegation. They know they're not going to get relegated. They're going to push for the top end of the table, and they're going to try and push in Europe as well. Relegation was basically between Irish Worcester and maybe Newcastle if they'd had a bad start, but they didn't. Everyone else didn't have to worry about relegation. So relegation really is a red herring as far as the Champions Cup teams go. Too many games. The players play too many games. Now, the French teams play more games than the English teams do, and the Pro 14 has as many scheduled games as the Premiership does. Okay, not all the Pro 14 teams play in the Anglo-Welsh Cup, but it's a similar amount of games. So the too many games one is, whilst the players might be playing too many games, it's not a difference between the Premiership Rugby and the other two leagues to say why they shouldn't be doing quite so well. One that has been come up this time is injuries, and there have been more injuries in the Premiership this season. But the other leagues have injuries too. It's not a monopoly that the Aviva Premiership has around this. Clermont, for example, were really suffering quite a lot themselves. And whilst there has been a lot in the Aviva Premiership, I don't think that injuries is the reason for their poor performances, or the root cause of it anyway. I think there's a reason why the players are getting injured more, and I think that's the reason. That's much more what the difference is, rather than injuries per se. I think that's just a symptom of the kind of disease, as it were. Fatigue and the Lions is also is the one that's being brought up, and that the Aviva Premiership teams always do badly after a Lions tour. Well, you know what? The Irish also had players on that Irish tour. On that Lions tour, and they only have 4 teams to spread them around, whereas the English teams do have more teams than that. Now, of course, Saracens did have a large number of players there, but even so, the Irish teams also had a large number of players there, and they don't seem to have, they're not using that excuse. I mean, they're the ones that have gone through and we're comparing them to. So again, yes, there is, the Aviva French players have played more because the Irish teams rested their players more, but that's down to the Premiership teams not resting the players and the player welfare rather than fatigue per se. And there's a reason why the Aviva Premiership teams haven't rested their players as much, and that is what I think is the root cause of this whole thing. Now, this hasn't been a vintage season for the Premiership, let's be honest. If you look at Saracens, they've had a run of about 7 defeats, didn't they? Wasps, one of the other teams that make the playoffs the last couple of years and have gone well in Europe before, also didn't start the season very well and struggled, but have managed to turn things around and get back together again. Exeter are the only team that hasn't had a sort of really poor section yet. So it's not been a vintage performance by in the Aviva Premiership, but by the Aviva Premiership top sides either. Anyway, so yes, it is a bad year for. It's not a great year for the Premiership teams' performances. Now, what do I think is the reason that the English teams have failed in Europe? And I think it comes down to small squad sizes. We see that manifesting itself in the injuries, in the fatigue that we have, and this idea that there are too many games and the players are playing too much. This is what I think leads to those sort of things, those issues that we're having. Now, the Aviva Premiership salary cap is way bigger than the Welsh one. From memory, I think it's about twice the size. So it's not down to money per se, because the Aviva Premiership sides clearly have some cash, and Scarlets did absolutely fine with a lot less cash than Bath did, for example. Now, there has been wage inflation amongst the top players. Not so much amongst the bottom players. Whilst they have had inflation, it's not been to the same degree as the players at the top end. So your Premiership players who are not going to make international level, who may be fringe players for a Premiership club, have not seen their wages go up to the same degree as the international players and the stars of the Aviva Premiership sides, who have seen their salaries go up significantly over the last couple of seasons. Now, what's driven this? Okay, sure, the Aviva Premiership has had more money, more TV money, but the salaries have gone up quicker than the income has gone up. And I think marquee players are part of what drives this. Now, remember, there are 2 marquee players that each Aviva Premiership side can have. They can have one homegrown player who sits outside of the salary cap, although the salary doesn't count towards the salary cap, and they can hire one person from outside the Premiership, whose salary does not does not get counted towards the salary cap. Now, if you're that second best player that's come through the academy and has been playing, has played for a number of years for your club, and say you're considered the second best player, however you rate that. So, for example, say we compare Mako and Vilimpano, Billy Vunipola and Farrell. So only one of those can have marquee status and not be an F salary not included in the salary cap. Now, if we assume that that's Farrell because he was down for World Player of the Year, and Clive halves are known to get paid one of the top paid positions anyway, then that means that the 2 Vunipolas can't be marquee players, and they have to be and their salaries have to be counted within the salary cap. Now, can you expect them to get paid half what Farrell gets paid, even though they are seasoned English internationals? They're names that bring players onto seats just like he does, and they also win games as well. So you can't expect them to get paid a significant or that much less. So yes, their salaries have gone up quicker than the others. The only way that the teams have been able to cope with that is to basically cut a couple of the fringe squad players that would normally come in and give those players a rest during the season. So how do we solve this? What's the answer to this anyway? Maybe getting rid of the marquee players might be one answer, so you don't have that, so everyone has to be within the salary cap. You don't have these people getting way more and then the others having to try and keep up with them. So hopefully bring down, and that might hopefully bring down the thing. Maybe we could have a maximum salary for players. Now, I know people would say that would be restraint of trade and all this kind of stuff, and the players could be exploited. But if you have, say, an X% of each club's revenue has to go into paying players, or a minimum salary cap too, then that could ensure that the players weren't being exploited and the clubs running off with all the profits. And let's be honest, there's only one team that makes a profit every single year, and that's Exeter Chiefs. All the other clubs have made losses, and now I think Saints and Leicester Tigers normally make a profit but have invested in their grounds, and so hence they made a loss the last year or two, I think it is, whereas Exeter managed to actually build their ground up and still maintain a profit. But everyone else, as I say, makes a loss. So it's not like the clubs are exploiting the players for some massive amounts of profits anyway, or they could do, because hey, there just isn't that much cash in rugby. The other way of doing it is to have a minimum squad size. That way, they have to have. Obviously, this would again mean that players would get, or somebody would have to get paid less, because if you're going to have 40 players in your squad rather than say 35 or whatever the number is, then obviously you're going to have to pay more players, which means that each of the players can't get paid as much. But then again, that would then go towards the player welfare side of things. The other option that goes along the same sort of line is to lower the maximum number of games players can play. At the moment, that maximum number of games gets turned into minutes played. Now, if you're a prop or a hooker who gets substituted quite frequently, then you actually can end up playing more games than, say, a centre or a winger will be allowed to. Now, at the moment, that limit is so high that it's very rare that players have to be rested anyway, or their season sort of stops early. So maybe that needs to come down, and maybe for props and hookers, especially, and also for other players, that it should be an absolute number of games and minutes. So if you go across the threshold for either, you're not allowed to play any more games. The reason for that is that training can be as much wear and tear on players as actually playing. So if you're still training for your half hour of a game or your 20 minutes coming off the bench, you're still taking a lot of bashing during the week. Just because you're only playing the last 20 minutes or last half hour of a game doesn't mean that you're not there's no wear or tear on you, and that you don't need a rest as well. So I think basically that's the answer. The answer is that the Aviva Premiership squads need to have larger squads, and that the top end players especially, need to think about what's more important to them. Is it the cash, or is it the fact or is it allowing the club to afford someone else who can help them with their workload for player welfare? That's what it's going to come down to. Those are my thoughts as to the problems for the Aviva Premiership sides. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, or you can catch me on Twitter at DrivingMaul. Again, my face is up there, so please click on it and subscribe to help me get to 1,000 subscribers. It's what I need to keep my YouTube partner status. So please do that. And catch you all tomorrow for the Rugby Chat Show.